Friends, us car guys and gals are a nostalgic bunch. We like to spend our time telling tall tales of the cars of yesteryear, cars that were better because they were more agile, they were more balanced, and wish someone would make us a car like that today. Well, what would happen to our storytelling if someone did? Okay, so you guys got to belt in more than normal. Get your notebooks out, your iPads, whatever it is, because we have so much to cover. I don't even know where to begin here. And really, actually, BMW folks, you guys love these codes, so let's start with the codes. There's the S55 engine, which is in the M3, M4. So they actually start life kind of the same. They're both inline 3-liter blocks, and they kind of sound like that when they wind up. You can hear them as they go by here. But really the big difference is how many turbos they have. So the S55 has 2 turbos. This has a single turbo. But this single turbo is a twin scroll setup. And what that means is it's kind of licensed for the BMW engineers to go and pilfer more bits out of the S55. So what they've done is they've taken the exhaust manifold, which is broken up into 2 banks. So the rear 3 cylinders, the front 3 cylinders, and it channels the exhaust gas into 2 separate, basically, channels that go into the turbocharger, into the impeller, makes it more efficient for the turbocharger. Now there's other bits that they've pilfered from the S55, and starting from the top, it's basically the intake manifold, the high temperature plugs, and then going into the bottom, the crankshaft bearings. But then the very cool bit is the actual sump itself, and then the oil extractor, and that's to control the lateral acceleration, and really cooling the engine under lateral acceleration. And that works in conjunction with the piston rings from the S55, which it's just like music when it sounds like that. Anyway, put aside all that, in the tech review, we covered a bunch of the cooling stuff, so make sure you go back to the tech review to check that out. Now, putting this all together, what does it translate to in terms of numbers? Well, it's 365 horsepower, which comes in at a relatively high 6,500 RPM, which you already heard, and then 343 pound-feet of torque, which comes in at a very low 1,400 RPM, stays flat all the way to 5,260. But what's interesting here is kind of a riddle. What does this BMW M2 have in common with a Porsche 911 Turbo S and a Buick convertible? Overboost. So from 1,400, it'll actually go into 369 pound-feet of torque. So now let's put all that together, and how does that translate out here at Laguna Seca?
Okay, people, this is an incredibly good day at the office. We are just about to get on Laguna Seca. M2. I don't even know what to say because I'm super excited. Let's put our foot into this thing. Normally we just go into pulling power, so let's go into pulling power on Laguna Seca. So we got 11 turns here. We're going to get into one that's probably the most well known, is this Cooper Tires bridge. Put our foot into it. Let's just say she pulls. Not exactly the lightest car in the world, but if you think about what a Corvette weighs and a 911 weighs nowadays, that's like the new lightweight. So here is the famous spot where you want to carry really speed going up this elevation change, and that's where this kind of power that comes in at such low engine speeds is so important. Now let's brake, 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 brake. Get into the famous corkscrew, people. This is an incredibly good day at the office! Brake, 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 brake. Come around turn 10. Okay, so we're coming into turn 11, and this is really the important point on pulling power. So let's downshift going into the turn. Okay, now let's put our foot into it. This is really a nice straight here on Laguna Seca, and notice this thing will actually let you bounce off the red line. You know, of course I want the manual transmission. There was no choice. All these cars on the track today are DCTs. But notice, a single turbo inline 6, it doesn't really run out of steam. This thing will go all the way up to electronically limited 155 miles an hour.
Okay, now if you've been watching this show for a while, you know driving dynamics are incredibly important to us, especially when it sounds like that. But this is like the holy grail. This is like the church. of driving dynamics. I mean, come on now, this is like the spiritual successor of like the original M3 if you think about it from a size perspective. So this is so important. Now, I could go on about aluminum axles back here, 19-inch wheels. In the DCT model, which this is and the one we are driving, it has an additional transmission oil cooler that sits in the front next to all those different water coolers and radiator and all that kind of stuff. That's great and all, but the reality is we need to focus on one number when it comes to driving dynamics, and that is 235 pounds. The M2 weighs 235 pounds less than an M4. I know this is very confusing with the M4 and M3. I want to say M3 like I've been trained to say M3. I was a BMW guy for many years, so it's very hard for me to say M4, but M4, 235 pounds, and it's 235 pounds and a shorter wheelbase. So, how does that affect driving dynamics in the very reverent place of Laguna Seca?
What can I say? When a car is lit, or when a company is got the balls enough to put us on Laguna Seca, and frankly their advertising slogan for the past 40 years has been Freude am Fahren, ultimate driving machine. Putting all the mumbo jumbo aside, now in a car like this, rear drive that's been designed for, frankly, situations like this, you wouldn't expect it, but there's been times I've been on this track where you do get a little bit of roll either side to side or it rolls in on itself on the rear wheels. You get none of that here. And this, especially when we get into this turn, check this out. We've got a nice left-hand sweeper, but we also have an elevation change, so this is the kind of thing that would actually disturb the plane of motion of car, and you don't have that here at all. Now this is another great example. Remember, this is the one where you want to keep the speed to basically keep the throttle going so you get the speed up this elevation change, and then all of a sudden the car just explodes. So you get more power, but notice you don't lose composure, and that's, frankly, you know, before I was a Lotus guy, I was a BMW guy, and that came out a little bit there. That's awesome.
Now there's some other bits and bobs we have yet to cover here, and one of the most important really has more to do with this specific day rather than this specific car. If you notice, we haven't discussed the brakes, and there's a specific reason for that. I don't think it's fair to really talk about the brakes here when they've been driven within an inch of their lives by probably about 100 to 200 people before I got to this car. So I think it's more prudent to put a pin in the conversation of the brakes, get the car down in Los Angeles, take it out to Moto Canyon, and try it out with fresh brakes. Other than that, there is the rev matching, which you have probably heard a couple of times as I'm playing around with the DCT here. But then, and we can't have this conversation without talking about the fenders, man. I mean, you know, you look at like Subarus and those kind of cars, and they got this stupid boy racer look to them, and that's part of the reason why I'm not that excited about those cars. I mean, I got a lot of respect for them, but just the look, I want something more sensual. And the fenders on this thing, it's the first thing you notice when you walk up to it. Yes, it's a typical like 3-box, like European sports sedan design. It's like they're not really breaking any design rules there. But when you add these like sensual fenders, and they don't have like specific hard creases to them, they're just, I keep on overusing the term sensual, but they're more feminine. They take this, what could have been a boy racer car, and made it into like a boy, not a boy racer, a girl racer car, if there is such a thing. And now with that, I think we should go back to the track.
So let's talk about this transmission a little bit here. This is the DCT. So there's a couple things that are different that I covered in the tech review. With the DCT, you actually get a separate oil cooler, transmission oil cooler, that sits into the front of the car, and I can totally see why you would need it, because here, we've been beating the crap out of these things all day, and frankly, BMW has been holding this event for like 3 weeks here in Laguna Seca. So these cars have literally, when they say like, take them out, drive them hard, and put them away wet, that's been it for 3 weeks. So I'm coming into this thing relatively early, and I'm surprised at literally how strong this thing is, and I think it's a big function of the additional cooling that this transmission gets here. Now, there are a couple of instances where I do get some denied shifts, but then that's only on downshifts, but here we've got the upshift, we come out of that one turn, that's a slight turn, we get the elevation change, and that's when the thing really, top end, it's amazing how much power you get when you combine this transmission with the engine. It frankly likes to rev quite a bit because the peak power comes at 6,500 RPM. I mean, that's a screaming engine. And keep in mind, people, it's a 3-liter inline 6. You wouldn't expect that kind of power at 6,500 RPM.
So I know I've hit you guys with a hell of a lot of numbers throughout this episode, but wait, there's more. Those fender flares that I just waxed on poetically about, there is some function to their form. So if we were to compare the front track of this to an M235i, it's a little over 2 inches wider. The rear track is just a little under 2 inches wider. Then you combine that with the actual fender flares themselves, the overall width of the car is now up by about 3 inches. The ride height is changed as well. It's lowered by about 0.3 of an inch. Now yes, if you take these numbers, combine it with the higher horsepower, lower weight, the cooling in the front, yes, it all affects the driving dynamics, but I would argue more importantly, it just makes the car look so much more mean.
Okay, so as we get into our last lap here, our cool down lap here, we're gonna dial the speed back, sadly. I noticed 2 things. Number 1, the trip computer is screaming at me through the steering wheel saying we only have 24 miles of range, so that would prove that we've had an incredibly good day here at the office. And number 2, well, I gotta hand the car back. So before we do that, I do have to tell you, I think we do need to talk a little bit about the interior as we cool the car down. There are some special bits, like notice there's this trim here, like the contrast stitch on the steering wheel, which adds a little speciality to it. Granted, I would like to get a lighter color. I mean, it's too dark in here, especially a small car like this. Although I gotta tell you, it's not small to the point of feeling claustrophobic. It's small to the point of, like, I actually prefer this size over the 3 Series car. I mean, really, I actually do. But then again, I'm a Lotus guy, so I'm weird. Then notice you get that carbon fiber bit there. I don't know how much I like the carbon fiber, to be honest with you, but I can see why they'd want to add some speciality to the carbon fiber. But the biggest thing I noticed here, guys, the steering wheel. The whole point of it, it's light. And I don't mean like picking it up light. I mean, it's light in design to the point where most of you guys, okay, you might take it on tracks like we're doing today, not often. You're gonna be commuting. You're gonna take your girl out. You might even take your mother out on Sunday for like Christmas dinner or something like that. I don't know. But the beauty of this is when you're using it really on real days, you can see everything. Which, in a track car, I want to be able to see this stuff and not be looking here as opposed to what I really want to look is there. And with that, we have to say goodbye. Parting is such sweet sorrow.
So in summary, what do we got? Well, there's more balance in a more efficient package, and when I say efficient package, it is a smaller package. But you know, I could sit here and go through platitudes of dynamics and engineering and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, you want this. I want this. It is that good. But it presents an interesting bit of questions and conversations that you and I have to have. Like, you and I talk a lot about what do cars like different models compete with. And in this, I'm not going to ask you that question because it does not compete with a CLA 45. It does not compete with an Audi S3. And it doesn't compete really with anything in its price range. That's the reality of it. And there's a couple of reasons why, and it's not as simple as just it's a rear drive car and those cars are not rear drive cars. This is a car that has been engineered by a bunch of car freaks. You know, it's funny, I was talking to the head of BMW M division, and he was saying his engineers came to him and said, oh, let's start with the 3-liter block, and it'll be cheaper that way. But then he got the bill for all the bits to make the M2, and he's like, well, wait a minute, this is almost as much as building a new engine, which kind of tells you how much engineering that went into this. And really think about this, when you try to get more power out of an engine or out of a car, it's not just increasing the horsepower or torque, it's also increasing the air that gets into the engine and keeping the engine cool. And that's a lot of what went in here, and is more than kind of half the story. So the whole thing, putting it all together, really is not more power or is this more balanced or do you want it? It's a function of, you know what? Is it this or an M4? And that's the thing that's been rolling around in my brain as I lap this track time and time and time again in this car. Because yes, you get more raw power, in an M3 or an M4, you get a more luxurious car, a bigger car, but frankly, this is much more balanced, at least in my eyes. So I'm going to turn this question around to you guys, and really the question is very specific. Would you choose the M2 or would you choose the M4 or M3? And it's not just which one would you choose, tell me which one would you choose, why you would choose it, what you currently drive, and what region of the world you hail from. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you can download for free from Apple iTunes or Google Play. And number two, maybe, just maybe, someone attached, 5 virtual reality 360-degree video cameras to that car and drove a couple of laps around this track. Now, if someone possibly had done that, there may be another short episode coming up of a 360-degree video of that car lapping this track. So, until that potential point, bis später.